nearly 10 years since my burnout experience, and I believe that it wasn't necessary for me to burn out, and it's not necessary for you either. In this podcast, my guests and I share our real-life experiences with burnout. We get into the science of stress and share actionable tips on how to prevent burnout and how to recover from it. I'm Hannah Holden, ex-management consultant and burnout survivor. I work with management consultants to help them avoid and overcome burnout. I help them to get intentional about their choices, rebuild their energy, and embed new healthy habits so that they can get back to loving life. Jo, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation and what we are going to be talking about. So we're going to cover a few things. We're going to talk about toxic work environments and practices and what they look like, but also what we can do about it and your views on self-esteem. So let's start with, how does somebody identify that they're in a toxic environment? What does toxic behavior look like?
Thank you, first of all, Hannah, for having me. I'm really excited to be talking about a subject that you and I are very, very passionate about. So if we were to talk about how do I know if I'm in a toxic environment, I think first and foremost, it's about knowing how your body feels. I think anyone can relate. And I mean, there's lots of ways I can give examples of look out for this, but to me, the biggest indicator of being in a toxic environment is what your body is telling you. So levels of anxiety that you're experiencing and you can't quite put your finger on it. Another word, the hair on the back of my head keeps standing up. But I truly believe that if you're in a toxic environment, it translates into physically how you're feeling. So you're not sleeping well. You may be adopting more addictive behavior to cope, like having a drink more than you should at night, smoking more, maybe taking something to help you sleep better, sluggishness in the morning, brain fog, and the sheer anxiety. And I think if I kind of sum that up, it's, can I be me in this environment? And that may be telling you that you're not in an environment that embraces who you are.
So a lot of the symptoms that you've just described are the symptoms of stress. And so effectively what we're saying is that that individual doesn't feel safe in that environment and their stress response is being triggered.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, if we had to talk about what are some of the signs, I think they're quite straightforward. You feel like you're being manipulated. You feel like your values are being compromised. You feel like your boundaries are being compromised. Excessive working hours, lack of recognition. We all know those things. But I think other things are like highly controlling behavior. And that controlling behavior can be in processes or systems. So too many controls put in place that break down someone's ability to feel empowered and feel free to work in an environment in the way that they feel drives their creativity and their positive energy. So being very controlling. Manipulation, we all know what that looks like. Or maybe we don't, but how do you know when you're being manipulated? Well, I truly believe it's quite simple. How's my body feeling? I know when I'm feeling uncomfortable. You know that. Sometimes you don't quite know how to name it, but I think very often you can trust it inside your own physical body. Gossiping. Gossiping is a toxic trait. And so people that you report into, what are they saying about your colleagues? What's the behavior like in a boardroom? They really are very straightforward things. And I think so often, in my view, I think two things happen. One is the scary thing. You come into an organization, you start to assimilate and adopt the same behaviors because that's what you think in order to survive, to keep my job, to be safe, or they leave. So it's one or the other. And look, I'm definitely an encourager. I say to people, if you're in an environment that you can't assimilate, then leave. But there is another way, and that's also what I'm excited to share about today, which has been a very, very positive experience for me. and I know we're going to go into it, but how do you cope? Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes this is the job, you need to stick it out for personal reasons, for financial reasons, circumstances, the job market, the economy. There's lots of reasons why sometimes you have to stay. And what I'm talking about today is really what tools are there available to help you thrive and survive. But I love the word thrive, but maybe sometimes it's just to survive, despite the environment that you're in. And being in a toxic environment, you can, in the job workspace, is one thing. But what I'm going to share today about living with healthy self-esteem is actually tools and capabilities that you can use in any aspect of your life, both personal and in the working environment. So that's what I'm excited to talk about today.
And I think that lots of people are in an environment and they're undecided about, is this the place for me or not? And I think that even if you come to the conclusion that it's not the place for you, these tools would be helpful in that interim period while you're trying to decide, can I fit in? Can I cope with this? Or can the place change? Which is also an interesting question. When you see that organizational leaders are trying to create the change, they're trying to create a positive work environment, but can I stick it out for long enough while they create it? So I think that that's also, that these tools will also be useful for that. So we're going to be talking about self-esteem. Can you describe what self-esteem is and maybe what self-esteem isn't, the things that it gets mistaken for?
So I think, first of all, self-esteem is not affirmations. It's not just this thing of if I reprogram my brain every day to, if I say these one words, they're going to become and manifest in the practice of self-esteem. So I think it's important to emphasize that self-esteem is about a conscious practice every day. And it's something that you actively do about living healthily day to day. And when we talk about what we mean by practice, it's so important to emphasize that it's actually we're talking about self-discipline. And if you think of the book Atomic Habits, it's the daily practice of healthy habits that enable you to stay focused with your self-esteem. And I think, just quickly going back where we talked about being in a toxic environment, if there is no more dangerous place to be than in a toxic environment to derail if you have a healthy self-esteem. So that's why the practice and the self-discipline of acting in a certain way over and over again consistently translates into what I talk about being authentic, but living our core truth and living consciously. And so to summarize, it's a practice, it's a self-discipline, and it's something that you focus on every single day of your life.
Okay, and how does that, can you describe how that will then help somebody in that toxic environment that we were describing?
So I think that having a healthy self-esteem, if you think of a definition, which I love to use and I say it to myself every single day, it says, I'm a valuable and worthwhile human being, and I hold myself in high regard. What do we mean by holding yourself in high regard? It means that you see yourself as equal to others. So in a toxic work environment, one is, if you understand what healthy self-esteem is, you can recognize very quickly where it isn't in leaders in an organization. And that gives you the ability to kind of take a step back and go, what am I dealing with here? And recognize that often the behavior that you see in a toxic environment has very little to do with you, but actually has so much to do with that individual or that person. And I think when you realize you're not the problem, it gives you a lot of power and a lot of confidence in knowing that you have the tools to help navigate through that. So I think that's why healthy self-esteem is so important. And if I kind of sort of very simplistically talk about it, um, there's two or three fundamental pillars to living with healthy self-esteem. And the one is that you believe you are worthy. And when we talk about worthy, that you say, well, I deserve. And what do we mean by I deserve? Well, I deserve love. I deserve a healthy working environment. I deserve to be paid fairly. I deserve to be recognized for my efforts. I deserve to be seen. So many of those words that I've just used, if you had to ask most people to say, what do you deserve? I think they would struggle to answer that question. What do I deserve? Because by nature, and especially I'm so passionate about women in business and women thriving, um, how often do women just absolutely put themselves last? You know, everything else comes first before a woman can say, well, I deserve to come first, or I deserve, or I matter. And I think that the other very important pillar to self-esteem is believing that I am competent and that I can, and that I have the confidence to be able to live with healthy self-esteem and ask for the things that matter.
Yeah.
But the cornerstone, sorry, did you want to ask a question, Hannah?
No, I was going to reflect on what you were saying. It was reminding me that I've said on, I think I've said it on this podcast before. I think I might have said it in conversation with you before, that I think that self-worth was the root cause of my burnout, lack of self-worth, because it was my inability to put myself first, my inability to say, I need rest, I need some boundaries between my work and my life, I need to be able to delegate and share some of my workload. I need to train up other people to be able to take on my workload. I wasn't advocating for myself in any of those ways. And instead, I was just trying to continually prove myself by doing more and more and more. And at the root cause of that was a self-worth issue. So I think what you're saying is that self-esteem, therefore, is the opposite to this self-worth issue that I had. And the more that you can build that up, that becomes like almost like an armor to burnout is what I'm imagining. Like it's a protective shell that will keep you safe from the things that deplete you and contribute to burnout. So that was what I was reflecting on. But I also cut you up halfway. So what were you saying?
I'm just listening to what you shared as a result of your burnout. And I mean, I last year experienced severe burnout. I'm an entrepreneur. I've run my own business for the last 30 years. And boy, oh boy, did my world come crashing down last year. And if I reflect back on how did I get there? Because I think that when you've hit burnout and stress and you step back and you go, well, what happened? And it's something that creeps up on you day by day by day. And you don't realize that eventually your tank is completely overloaded and overflowing. Now you're drowning and you can't come up for air. And so it was a very, very real and very, very painful experience for me. And there were some severe consequences as a result of that stress and burnout. And when you sit back and you go, well, how did I get here? The scary thing is, the bottom line is it's actually about you, isn't it? Whether it's your fault or not your fault, it's still about you. And the journey to rediscovering who I was the journey of rebuilding my self-esteem. And so it sits so deeply within me that now this passion about guys, ladies, women in the workplace, there actually is hope. And that's the other word. I mean, having a healthy self-esteem and living with it every day of your life, it's hope. It actually gives you hope. And I go back to that, these pillars that I've just shared about knowing that I'm worthy and that I deserve, and knowing that I'm competent and I can. There's another very important piece to it, and that's the ability to be assertive. And assertion, if you look at the definition in self-esteem terms, is I take responsibility for my own needs, my own feelings, and my own thoughts. And I take that and I practice that every single day. And I think it's so important because there's so much out there at the moment about you must live with purpose, you must live consciously, you must have healthy well-being, and you must. And I think that so many of us are just overloaded with so-called gurus and influencers, and we're inundated with this, let's just go and do this. But the really, for me, it's the how. Uh, how do I do this every single day and make sure that I constantly keep filling my own buckets? Uh, and that's what stands out for me. And I think to be assertive is such an important aspect of living with self-esteem. And interestingly, assertion, when I give you that definition, it's the responsibility for your own thoughts, feelings, and needs. Assertion is actually also a communication style. And there's a way in which you can communicate effectively, and there is a way which you can communicate ineffectively. And I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail here because we're sharing a half an hour chat, and I'm mindful of the time. But ineffective communication style is either being passive or being passive aggressive or being aggressive. Mm-hmm. And effective communication is really, it's five things. Am I being direct? Am I being brief? Am I being honest? Am I being open? And am I being clear? And they five things. So it's a practice. Here we go again. But I think what's also important is to understand it's also about your body language. And this is also what I encourage in women is we don't know how to be clear, open, honest enough, brief. I mean, women, we love to talk. Maybe I'm stereotyping here, but I know I love to talk. And to be direct. How many women do you know start a sentence with shame, or shame man, or I'm sorry, and they apologize first before they finish what they want to speak about. And I go, what are you sorry for? I'm so sorry I'm late. Okay, but why are you sorry? Things happen. But we have a lot of women have a very passive communication style. Mm-hmm. And if you had to compare how men communicate, they're a lot more direct, they're a lot more brief, and they're far more to the point. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why we fear being assertive. And there's many examples of that. You feel intimidated. You know, what happens if I'm direct? It's quite intimidating. You have a fear of not being liked. You have a fear of being rejected because maybe you have a point of view that doesn't sit with everyone else. It's kind of, you sometimes think that if I'm being assertive, that means I'm approaching it with an all or nothing approach, which is not true, because assertion, the first premise of assertion in your communication style is that you are equal to the other person that you're communicating with, which means that you want to be heard, but you also want to listen. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some important fundamentals to when we're talking about communicating assertively. You worry about consequences. Good heavens, what happens if I tell someone, well, actually, I don't like this, or I don't agree? Will there be consequences to how I communicate? You worry about saying it wrong. What happens if it comes out in the wrong way and it's not the way that you intended? You worry about offending others. You worry about being laughed at. It's very confrontational. Human nature is uncomfortable with confrontation. We worry that confrontation is interpreted as being aggressive. Mm-hmm. You worry about being judged. And you may lose. You may lose in the end. So there's a lot of reasons why people fear being assertive. Mm-hmm. But very quickly, there's also some incredible benefits. And I've honestly lived and experienced this, because The more I've practiced assertion, healthy assertion, not aggression, the healthier my relations have become, both personally and in my business life. Um, it's One is, by practicing assertion, you're actually maintaining your beliefs and your values. And we know that um, when you're not living your truth and you're not living with your own values and your beliefs, that leads to burnout. It leads to stress. It's a known thing. Um, it's powerful when you suddenly discover that you have a voice. It's very, very powerful. Um, you're able to deal with issues at the time of it happening. So rather than it being delayed and you go home at night and you go, damn it, I should have, I could have, I would have. Why didn't I say that? Um, your feelings are contained. So when you're practicing assertion, you learn to recognize, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? And you integrate the two. Um, you're able to take some risks that maybe you ordinarily would never have done because you now have the tools. It fosters healthy relationships, believe it or not. Being assertive is actually healthy. It keeps both parties' self-esteem intact. When you practice healthy assertion, you are actually nurturing the other person's self-esteem as well as yours. That can only produce a positive outcome. It clarifies. Gosh, I never knew you felt like that.
So how does that work? How do you feel that being assertive is supportive of the other person's self-esteem? Is that because you are being open and honest and therefore respectful of them?
Correct. So healthy self-esteem and healthy communication and being assertive, the fundamental to that is the other person you are engaging with, whether it's about conflict or not, or whether it's a difficult conversation. Fundamentally, I respect you and you are my equal. So if you think of passive or aggressive communication, passive communication implies that I am not equal to you. I come submissively. What I think or feel doesn't matter. Aggressive communication is, you don't matter. All that matters is I get my point across and you just better listen. So if you think of that by definition, then you think of passive aggressive. So it's saying it passively, but in actual fact, the person who's on the receiving end is interpreting it as an aggressive implication if you don't. So those are very destructive communication styles. And the beauty of building and living with a healthy self-esteem is, how do I practice being clear, open, honest, brief, and direct? You can only do that because you're taking responsibility for how I feel, how I'm thinking, and what I'm needing. Make sense?
Yes, and I'm thinking about it in the work environment and how, so if somebody is experiencing a challenging work environment, how somebody can bring that in. And I was reading something the other day about how people shouldn't assume that their manager already knows,
No.
and how therefore they can be a bit passive. You know, as an employee, being, if you believe that the other person knows and they're not doing something about your needs, then there is a level of passive aggressiveness in your behavior towards them, because you're implying that they don't, you know, you've told yourself that they don't care or that you're not important. There's a story that's been created, but actually we can get rid of all of that if we are able to be open and direct and clear and honest and transparent about how we're feeling. And actually sometimes managers are able to pick up on these things, but sometimes they're not. And that was something I was reading about the other day, that just, I could see some of the dynamics you were describing being played out.
Yeah. So often there's a tendency that we think that we put leaders on some kind of pedestal, and we make an assumption that they're okay, that they're, in touch with who they are. I think that is so far from the real truth. I think leaders are probably far, far more alone. If you look at, when leaders talk about what are the biggest challenges they face, it's lack of connection, and feeling very alone. So to assume that they're on top of things. They're really not. And when you're living with a healthy self-esteem, it's particularly in my field of work, which is around strategic talent acquisition. So I play a big role in helping companies find leaders who are going to make a positive impact in the organizations within which they come into. And fundamentally, part of my process is how do I know whether they have a healthy self-esteem? And if they don't have it in certain, which areas of their life or connection do they not have that healthy self-esteem? And I just want to come back to, and I use that pebble in the ocean. When you are engaging honestly, positively, healthily, with the intent to foster positive relationships and to resolve conflict and different points of view, you are yourself that pebble in that ocean. That behavior becomes infectious. And aside from leaders who are actually narcissists or pathologically have a problem, which we know they do exist, but the majority of people in leadership roles or management roles want connection, they want realness, and they want authenticity. And when you're practicing self-esteem with those individuals, they in turn will respond to you in a healthy way. I do believe that. And when I suppose the question to ask yourself is, well, when do I need to be assertive? I mean, we've talked about the benefits. We've talked about why we won't be assertive because we have these number of fears. But when can you use it? And I think there's a couple of lovely examples. I mean, the obvious one being, I need to resolve some conflict. It's when your own needs are not being met. It's to give praise. It's a wonderful opportunity to build people up. But also it's when you have to provide feedback that's critical, and it's negative criticism. It's also to be able to express our opinions. And I had a group CEO who was the chairman of a board as well. And he said, Joe, he said, why do I hire people? He says, it's because I don't want them all to think like me. I hire people because diversity of opinion is what creates a robust business. So we hire to express our opinions and to express our feelings. But we need to learn how to understand what we're thinking and feeling, so that we are able to express our opinions far more effectively and not bring emotion into it. And so importantly, it's to be able to ask for help. Assertion is saying, I need help, and I need help here. So there's some very good reasons why the practice of assertion is so important. And I'll never forget, and I love this definition, when they say, no is a complete sentence.
Yeah. Yep, I've heard that one. So
absolutely.
If somebody has been listening to all of this and they think, that sounds great, I need a bit more of that. I need to learn how to be more assertive, and I need to know how to build up my self-esteem and believe in my worth and my competence more. Do you have any suggestions for where somebody might start?
So I think that there's some really good reading material out there about living with healthy self-esteem. And there's the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which is a book written, I think, by Nathaniel Bland. I can look it up for you quickly. But
it's all right. We can include it in the show notes.
Yeah. He's known as the expert in self-esteem, and he's written a number of books which I found were invaluable. I think the second thing is that I've become a coach specifically focused in how do you build and the practice of healthy self-esteem. So if anybody would want to have a session with me about where do I start or how do I do this, I'd be more than happy, and also could refer them to a network of coaches who bring self-esteem and the practice of self-esteem into coaching. So I do think that starting there is a very good practice. And I think just daily asking yourself a couple of kind of fundamental things. Like, if you're sitting with a situation where you're feeling compromised, and I go back to that kind of, my body doesn't feel great, I'm experiencing stress, I'm adopting behaviors that aren't good for me. I think the first thing is kind of ask yourself, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Can you write that down? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then to go and say, well, what am I thinking around this problem? What's my thinking about this problem that I'm experiencing? And then what am I feeling? And integrating those two. Because I think so often our feelings completely dominate and we lose the ability to think or feel effectively in a logical, rational way. And then what's the solution? Well, what am I trying to solve then? If I know what the problem is, I know what I'm thinking, and I know what I'm feeling, what's the solution? And then what do I need? And I applied this practice when, in the practice of self-esteem. And I certainly realized that one of the things that is a shortcoming in me is I don't know how to ask for help, and I don't know how to say I need. And if you think of just your relationship with your husband and when you become a mom, how often are we not able to say to each other, I need these things from you. I need. And translating to go, how do I ask for help? Because we don't know how. Or we assume the other person can read our minds. It's our responsibility to communicate what we think, feel, and need. And I think that is just a kind of starting point to think about, how do I live with this healthy self-esteem? And I think to close off, there's this lovely saying, the path to building a healthy self-esteem is paved with many miracles. And I think that that's so true. If I just think how much healthier my business is now as a result of the fact that I practice healthy self-esteem. And people go, is it really that simple? And I say to them, yeah, actually it is.
Well, yes, I agree with you. That is a lovely note to finish on. Thank you so much. I do think that, like I said earlier, that obviously the podcast is about burnout, and for me, self-worth was at the root cause of mine. And so these are interesting and powerful tools that people can start adopting to help to protect themselves and help to build stronger relationships. Because as you say, building somebody else's self-esteem is obviously going to be building a better relationship with them. So thank you so much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Hannah. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to some feedback on this podcast and hearing whether people have found it useful and valuable.
Me too. I'll make sure that you get any feedback I get. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Take care then, hey?
These podcasts are here to help you manage your stress and burnout, and your feedback is really valuable. So please rate this podcast and also drop me a note with any questions, suggestions, or feedback that you might have. One of the most common questions I get asked is, where should I start? And I believe that the best place for you to start is to learn how to soothe your nervous system. I've created a free download with instructions for 5 different ways that you can do just this, and all of them work pretty much instantly. It's called the Essential Toolkit for Management Consultants. You can download it now at www.hannahholden.co.uk/essential. One last thing, it's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your doctor, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.